have the flocculonodular lobe that controls your balance and eye movement. And then you have the vermis at the center, which is the middle part of the lateral hemispheres that control posture, locomotion, and fine motor coordination. And then you have the lateral hemispheres. It goes all across, involved with planning, practice, learning complex movements, and all of those things. Lateral hemispheres, again, is divided into anterior lobe and posterior lobe by a primary fissure. You'll see that in the picture as well. Then you have the diencephalon, and that's in figure 11.20. This diencephalon is located between the brainstem and the cerebrum. It consists of thalamus, subthalamus, epithalamus, and hypothalamus. Thalamus almost looks like this yo-yo kind of thing. You have these two areas connected by interthalamic adhesion in between. The two sides have all these different bulges, motor nuclei, sensory nuclei, all this limbic system, lots of things going on in thalamus. Thalamus functions as an integration center. All sensory input that reaches the cerebrum, except for the sense of smell, synapses in the thalamus, interacts with other parts of the brain to control motor activity, and they're involved in emotions and pain perception. So all of the emotion, pain, usually we put that back in. Also any kind of moods like fear, all of those, anxiety, all of those are within your thalamus. Then you have subthalamus. That's where you have all the motor functions are involved in there. That is inferior to the thalamus. And then you have epithalamus, superior and posterior to the thalamus, consists of your habenular nuclei and pineal body. Pineal body, actually we'll look at that when we go into the endocrine system. It's involved, plays a role on with hormones, releasing things from there, plays a role on onset of puberty and sleep-wake cycle, while habenular nuclei influence emotions through the sense of smell. Then you have the hypothalamus. This is the main visceral control center of the body and is vitally important to overall body homeostasis. You have so many functions of hypothalamus. Take a look at the picture in figure 11.20c. You see so many functions. Basically, you can divide them into 4 functions here. We say one of it is autonomic nervous system function. That regulates heart rate, blood pressure, all of those things. And then you have endocrine system that does most of regulation of body temperature, food intake, all kinds of just endocrine system functions. And then you have the limbic system. Limbic system is it's involved with emotions, a lot of center for emotional response and behavior, motivations, sexual behavior, pleasure, feelings, rage, fear, all of those are within your limbic system in your hypothalamus area. And you have the basic body functions as well. The rest of the other functions would be like thirst, hunger, things like that, sexual arousal. All those go into your other basic body functions. Then we have the cerebrum. Cortex of the cerebrum is folded into ridges called gyri and grooves called sulci or fissures. So when you look at the brain, and we'll actually get to not dissect it, well, we have one preserved in the lab, so we'll look at that. I may be able to get one for dissection too. But you have all this gyri, sulci area, that you have grooves within it, you have this bulges, all this very complex. This cerebrum part is the part we look at when we think of brain, this big area. So you have a fissure in between that divides the cerebrum into the left and right hemisphere. So that's the longitudinal fissure that divides it into left and right hemispheres. Each hemisphere has 5 lobes. You have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe, and a lobe inside the temporal area there. We call that the insula. So know those lobes and know their function. There's a figure 11.21 that talks about their function. Basically, your frontal lobe is involved in voluntary motor function, motivation, aggression, sense of smell, and mood. Parietal lobes contain major sensory areas receiving sensory inputs. Think of parietal lobes as sensory inputs. Anything got to do with touch, pain, temperature, balance, taste, all of those. Occipital lobes contain your visual centers, while temporal lobes are for evaluating smell and hearing input involved in memory. A lot of abstract thought and judgment, all of those things are in temporal lobe, which is sometimes when you're thinking, you usually do this, right? Or maybe I just do it. But temporal lobe, right there, you also a lot of abstract thought and judgment. Insula, which is located deep within the lateral fissure, is another lobe that is involved mostly with taste in there. So the cerebrum has the gray matter, which forms the cortex and nuclei of the cerebrum. White matter forms the cerebral medulla, which consists of 3 types of tracts. Within the tracts, you'll see the tracts go this way, down, so it connects within the hemispheres, outside hemispheres, and totally outside the brain. So when we say association fibers, they connect areas of the cortex within the same hemisphere. They're short kind of association fibers, so within the hemispheres connect areas there. Commissure fiber are the ones that connect one cerebral hemisphere to another. It goes across the 2 hemispheres. Projection fibers are the ones that connect the cerebrum to other parts of the brain and spinal cord. So it goes all the way, projection all the way down, usually from head, just to connect to the spinal cord. So that figure is 11.22. You'll see all those 3 types of fibers connecting there. Then we talk a little bit about basal nuclei in the textbook. That includes the corpus striatum, subthalamic nuclei, and substantia nigra. This is very important in controlling motor functions. And then a little bit on limbic system. We talk about that a little bit, not too much, so that's in figure 11.24. Includes parts of the cerebral cortex, basal nuclei, thalamus, hypothalamus, and olfactory cortex that's involved in memory, reproduction, and nutrition. Involved in emotional interpretation of sensory input and emotions in general. Go back to your limbic system. Then we look at some meninges. We looked at meninges of the spinal cord. We have the same meninges all the way in your brain as well. So you have a dura mater that attaches to the skull and has 2 layers that separate to form dural folds and dural venous sinuses. Beneath the dural matter, then you have the arachnoid matter, and there you have the subarachnoid space that contains all your cerebrospinal fluid that helps cushion the brain, protect it within there. Cerebrospinal fluid also has other proteins, nutrients for the cells as well, besides just being protecting the brain that way. And then you have the closest attachment is the pia mater, attaches directly to the brain in there. And the figure there is figure 11.25. You'll see the three of those meninges and the spaces in between. Notice that there is no epidural space in here in the brain. You have epidural space in the spinal cord, not in the brain. So if there's a trick question or anything, that says brain has epidural space, that's not right. Although, if a person gets injured or somehow traumatized, somehow in the head, there can be a fake epidural space created, from that. But normally the reason we don't have that epidural space is because the dura mater very closely sticks to the periosteum, very at close attachment. There's no space there, so we don't have the epidural space. Then we look at the ventricles. The ventricles, you just have the lateral ventricles that you can also say first and second, lateral ventricles coming down, then a 3rd ventricle and a 4th ventricle. That's the only ventricles you get in your brain. And you need a lot of blood supply to the brain. Your brain cells need to be continuously immersed. They need blood, glucose to do its work. So even if you don't get blood supply to your brain for minutes, you will die. So it's very important. So the lateral ventricles in the cerebrum are connected to the 3rd ventricle in the diencephalon by interventricular foramina. 3rd ventricle is connected to 4th ventricle in the pons by cerebral aqueduct, and the central canal of the spinal cord is connected to the 4th ventricle. So the fourth ventricle is connected to the